Federal health officials consider it an epidemic, yet you rarely hear a thing about it. At first, it seemed to strike only one segment of the population.
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer.
Fully half of San Francisco's 80,000 gay men already may carry the AIDS antibody. There have been 1,400 AIDS deaths here.
To date, the AIDS virus has claimed over 24,000 lives. For the first time, the number of AIDS cases passed the 100,000 mark. By the end of 1992, 263,000 Americans will be killed by this disease.
It's a holocaust in the sense that, like, it's some group is attacking our entire community, and no one seems to give a damn.
It took 10 years for the first 100,000 cases. The next 100,000 cases are all going to happen in the next 15 months. There's a new HIV infection every single minute. There's a new AIDS death every half hour. There are 212 new cases every day.
A lot of people passed away earlier than they should have. I'm not sure how to say when someone should pass away, but a lot of peers of ours, your mom, myself, had shorter lives. People who we went to school with or danced with. It became a very defining thing of that generation, our generation, I guess.
I mean, it's really weird to be in your 20s and be experiencing, like, your inner circle of best friends dying. That's just not a natural developmental milestone for most people in their 20s, but that's what we went through.
My name is Doug Elkins, and I'm a choreographer and a teacher of dance over at Rutgers University. And I have a company called Doug Elkins Choreography, etc. Well, I graduated college in 83 or 84. And my relationship, or my experiences with it, was by the time I was 4 years out of college, five people in my dance department that I studied at SUNY Purchase, not only SUNY Purchase, but people who I had danced with in the city. Some had contracted AIDS, and by about the beginning of the 90s, three of them had passed away.
My name is Ann Wennerstrand. I lost a lot of friends. I was a professional dancer. I was in school studying modern dance. I worked as a volunteer with the Manhattan Center for Living in the late 80s and early 90s, and that was a community organization that provided services to people with AIDS. So I worked with people in their homes, providing support. I worked in a soup kitchen for people with AIDS, and in my dance profession, I also had many close friends who died of AIDS who I helped out.
It was difficult to lose. It was difficult to lose friends, especially people who were about my own age, and we were just out of college. It was not anything any of us expected. The first openly gay person I ever knew was a camp counselor and the brother of a good friend of mine in camp. And I have a very strong memory of my friend coming to stay over with me in my apartment in New York to help take care of her brother while he was sick.
It had a huge effect on me. I mean, I remember, like in 1984, when I was still in college, my really closest friends who are gay men becoming very anxious about this thing that no one really knew what it was. It was called gay cancer at the time. It affected me personally in the caretaking that I got involved with friends. And then I became a volunteer for this organization called Manhattan Center for Living. So a lot of friends of mine were becoming more politically active, but I decided to get involved in like direct care for AIDS patients. And so I would go to people, not just my friends, but I would go to people's homes, people I didn't know, and I would go and work with them and sit with them and make sure they had all the services that they needed. We were applying for grants for medical care, getting grants through the city to make sure that, you know, these people's rent was paid. It was a very difficult time. But it was really my entry into the social work profession, actually, which is what I eventually did.
One of the members of my dance company was HIV positive while we toured. So as a result, we had special procedures when we were dancing if somebody got cut or injured during a rehearsal. To put on rubber gloves, we had to stop immediately if there was any kind of thing where blood, you know, just say somebody bumped into each other and there was a bloody nose. Precautions were more health precautions because we were dancers. You have to understand we were dancers and we were dancing barefoot. So just say there was a collision and Alan had a bloody nose or a hand cut and we were walking barefoot on the floor and we may have openings or cuts on our feet. So we had to take those precautions. But I felt some of it was, you know, overly done, like the first year.
Was there excessive paranoia in the beginning? Yes. I think before people knew what it was, you know, no one really knew how it was transmitted. Nobody really, you know, there was definitely some paranoia.
We became a lot more relaxed about it as we learned more about it. It also made us all very politically active. The AIDS crisis.
There was a lot of grassroots fundraising and activism to try to help these people. There was a lot of stigma attached to being gay, to having AIDS. People, you know, outside of New York City didn't really understand it. So the response of the dance world in terms of becoming socially active and raising money was a good thing. Brought the community together. We all marched as a company in a lot of the gay pride marches.
Thousands of gay men and lesbian women today march for homosexual rights. Some 200,000 people marched in San Francisco. Across the nation, the parades were dedicated to victims of the deadly disease AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. 70% of its victims are gay men.
I'm angry because there hasn't been enough research for AIDS, enough funding, and gay people are suffering, and it's outrageous.
We supported our friends. We had fundraisers for friends or members of the company who may have needed money for possibly for medications. Well, just something about the dance community. There's the community of the dance community, which people supported each other.
I mean, I think that the dance community, you know, like dancers responding to AIDS and World AIDS Day. So December 1st every year is World AIDS Day. And for many years on December 1st, we would have like a memorial dance concert at St. Mark's Place in New York City, and people would get up and read names of people that had died. So there was a lot of consciousness about it.
Listening to names being read, ceremonies, remembrances. A lot of the stuff that happened in the early days was going to protest because the government wasn't doing anything about it or acknowledging it.
More than 600 demonstrators crossed police lines to protest and to be arrested on the steps of the Supreme Court. Some of the police wore gloves because of concern about AIDS. The demonstration ended 4 days of protest in the Capitol over alleged inadequate programs to combat AIDS or to provide full rights for homosexuals.
They shouted their demands from the sidewalk and in the street. In a planned civil disobedience show, over 100 protesters blocked rush hour traffic at Broadway and Wall. Troops of police officers moved in, charged them with disorderly conduct, resisting arrest.
Gay people were marginalized, and it was a Reagan era, so there was a lot of stigma attached to being gay, to having AIDS. Like, it affected me more in my personal relationships, where certain friends of mine didn't tell me they were HIV positive until they got like extremely, extremely sick. Like in one case, my friend Errol, who was very self-stigmatized about it, didn't tell anyone he was sick until he was like close to dying, And I wish that there had been a more open atmosphere where he could have felt like, he could share that. But there was still, even within the dance world, which is very open and accepting, there was still stigma. And people just needed to survive and keep going and keep making work. There was like, at the same time, there was a response, but at the same time, there was sort of like, we've got to survive and we have to move forward, and people just kept going.
Yes, the dance community was coping with it the way they did in the medium of dance and theater. I was fortunate enough at that time to be apprenticing with a group called Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane Dance Company. The company was headed by a gentleman named Bill T. Jones. His lover, Arnie Zane, had passed away a year or so before from the complications of his HIV status. And while I was apprenticing there, he created a very famous work called D-Man in the Waters. D-Man was short for the name of one of the dancers, Damien Acovella, who had also contracted AIDS. So Bill made this very beautiful dance to a Mendelssohn symphony. And in the dance, the company is dancing and using images of swimming in the water, swimming against the stream, almost like a salmon, diving and splashing. But in the middle of the dance, Bill carries Damien on his back. At the time, Damien was sick and actually dying of AIDS. And at times people remarked that this wasn't, like certain dance critics remarked that this was out of place. It was too personal to bring someone who was sick and suffering from HIV status on stage. It was fine to make a dance about him, but some critics had some concern that it was not an artistic choice to have this man who was sick, very sick, holding on to, wrapped around the choreographer's shoulders or back during a section of the dance. And I found it a very beautiful, moving section. And at the time, there were many artists who were making work about the AIDS crisis and also about being out and visible as a gay person. So it was tied into a lot of things to, shine a light on something that wasn't being given attention at times.
And I mean, certain people were making work that talked about the AIDS crisis. Some people weren't. But I guess there were a lot of different responses to it. Definitely remember Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane. They were really coming on the scene in the mid-'80s. And Arnie contracted AIDS and became very sick, and he died. And Bill T. Jones' work often reflected a lot of stuff about the AIDS epidemic.
One of our board members had passed away. His name was Scott Gray. And a friend of mine, Johnny Moore's first partner, Jay, had died. He was a director of complications from the AIDS, from his AIDS. And I remember getting so frustrated after we were touring, my company was touring in the South, in Missouri. And during a talk back, shortly after our two friends had passed away, and I mentioned it in a question and answer thing, somebody said that AIDS was God's punishment for people being gay.
Homosexuality is a sin.
It was California Republican William Dannemeyer who recently declared on the House floor God's plan for man was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve.
So I decided to make a work that mixed voguing, the voguing that I had been doing, with Scottish Highland dancing. And I asked the mother of my house, Willie Ninja, to be the lead in it. The title itself is wordplay on Mary, Queen of Scots. Scots, Queen of Marys. Mary is a slang term. If somebody's gay, oh please Mary, oh he's such a Mary. So I made a large social dance that mixed these dance styles together. Gay club dancing and Scottish contra dancing. It's a strange, weird dance.
In the gay garden.
I thought it was a way to cope with it, and it was a way to celebrate a lot of my friends who were in the gay community. Friends who were not only colleagues, but also teachers, dancers, collaborators. It was both. I'm not sure if I thought of it as, if it's a protest, it was in the protest in the form of a celebration of who I thought they were, of my admiration for my friends.
The fact that I became a social worker?
Yeah. Response to it.
Definitely. I mean, what happened to me is I was dancing and I loved my dance career, and I thought it was really, it was important to do. But when people around you are dying and it just started to become kind of meaningless to me at a certain point. And I decided I wanted to get more involved in helping people. So yes, I was definitely responding to the loss, to the helplessness, and looking for ways to be more relevant. I thought at a certain point, at that stage in my life, I kind of thought dancing was a bit frivolous. I don't see it really that way now, but, I just couldn't really justify what I was doing when people around me were dying of this disease.
All right. Any closing thoughts?
No, just the opportunity to talk about them makes me, remember them fondly, but I miss them.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.